The veteran. They told to wait outside until they learned who she really was. It was 8:12 a.m. on a Wednesday when Lieutenant Colonel Nora Ellis parked her navy blue Buick in front of the state capitol building in Helena, Montana. The morning was crisp. Autumn leaves crunched under her heels as she stepped out, adjusting her wool coat over the sharp lines of her dress uniform. Silver oak leaves glinted from her epaulets. A combat action badge rested above her left pocket. Her ribbons, rows of them, spoke of decades of service, tours in Fallujah, Kandahar, Ramadi. But in this moment, she was just a visitor, in her own home state. She walked toward the glass entrance of the Capitol's East Wing, the public lobby, where signs directed visitors to the Veterans Affairs and Housing Committee hearing. She was early. The session wasn't due to begin for another hour, but she liked to observe the rhythm of a place before stepping into it. That habit had saved lives in the field and helped her avoid more than a few political landmines in the years since. As she approached the glass doors, she reached out to pull the handle, only to find it locked. She checked her phone. No missed calls, no emails. The message from the committee aide had been clear. Come to the East Wing entrance by 8:15. They'll let you in through the security lobby. Nora turned around, scanning the area. A younger woman in a red blazer was walking toward the door from the inside, clipboard in hand, earpiece in one ear. A staffer. Nora gave a small wave, ready to explain her early arrival. The staffer opened the door a crack and stepped out, not smiling. Hi there, she said quickly. I'm going to have to ask you to wait outside. This entrance is for scheduled speakers only. I understand, Nora said calmly. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Nora Ellis. I'm the scheduled speaker for the Veteran Equity hearing. Representative Dillon's office invited me. The woman paused, eyes flicking down to Nora's uniform, taking in the insignia, the posture, the stillness. And yet, something in her expression shifted into mild doubt, as though trying to reconcile the uniform with the face. No offense, but I don't have you on my list, the staffer replied, and we've had some confusion with +1s and reporters. You'll need to go around to the West Visitor entrance and come back through security. Sorry. Before Nora could respond, the door closed. Click. She stood there, hands by her side, boots motionless on the stone path. 5 minutes later, she was still outside. The wind picked up slightly. Her scarf fluttered against the collar of her coat. People walked past her. 2 businessmen, a young veteran in street clothes, a local reporter rolling camera gear. All were allowed in. At 8:21, a security guard she didn't recognize opened the door briefly to let in another man. Nora took a small step forward. Excuse me, she said. The guard turned, gave her a quick once-over, and interrupted. Ma'am, if you're dropping something off, deliveries go to the side entrance. No lobby access unless you're cleared. Nora didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stepped back. It wasn't the first time. 32 years in the military, longer if you counted ROTC, had taught her many things. Patience was one of them. So was the quiet weight of invisibility. Not every battle left scars you could see, and not every uniform opened doors. At 8:30 sharp, her phone buzzed. A text from Dillon's aide. We're inside. Where are you? Nora typed. Still outside the East Wing, was told to wait. 10 seconds later, the door flung open. A tall man in a gray suit and state rep pin rushed out. His face flushed as soon as he saw her. Colonel Ellis? He asked. She nodded. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. They didn't tell me you hadn't been let in. You were supposed to be escorted to the committee room. Please, come with me. He held the door for her. This time, it stayed open. As she stepped through, heads began to turn, because this time, someone had said her name out loud. The committee room was functional, bland, and predictably cramped. A long wooden table stretched the front, behind which sat 9 representatives in various states of attention. 3 were thumbing through documents, 2 whispering to aides, 1 adjusting his tie for what must have been the 5th time. The public gallery held about 30 folding chairs. Several were already filled with veterans in polos and baseball caps, spouses holding manila folders, young officers in fresh dress blues. All eyes turned when the aide announced her name. Lieutenant Colonel Nora Ellis, our invited witness for today's hearing on equity access in veteran services. At first, there was a pause, then a ripple. One of the older veterans, seated beside his oxygen tank, sat up straighter. The youngest Marine in the front row whispered something to his sergeant. The room, once half distracted, had just been realigned. Because in walked a woman they'd only ever seen in headlines, photographs, and official portraits. Not a symbol, not a name on a policy memo, but a human being, present, composed, and real. As she took her seat before the microphone, the chair of the committee, a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a rust-colored suit, cleared his throat. Colonel Ellis, thank you for your service and for joining us today. Would you care to begin with a statement? She leaned forward, her voice steady, warm, not loud, but resonant. I'm not here to speak on behalf of all women veterans. I'm here to tell you what it feels like to serve your country with everything you have, and then be asked to wait outside your own story. The words settled over the room. She continued, each sentence measured but firm, like stepping carefully through a minefield she already knew by heart. I was commissioned in 1991, first woman in my unit to deploy to the Gulf. I served in 3 combat zones. I was in Mosul when the medical tent ran out of morphine. I was in Kabul the day they pulled our interpreter's body from the canal. I came home to a thank you card and a long silence. She paused, then looked up, straight at the panel. That silence lives in our policy, in funding tables that leave women's health lines blank, in housing programs that assume no female vet is raising children alone, in the eyes of a staffer who sees your uniform but not your rank because it doesn't match her picture of what a hero looks like. Behind her, one of the younger audience members coughed into his sleeve, trying to mask the quiet crack in his breath. A woman at the far end of the table, Representative Lynn March, herself a Navy daughter, leaned forward. Colonel, what would you say is the most urgent change we need? Nora didn't hesitate. Stop treating veteran as a single silhouette. We don't all come home the same way, but we all deserve to be seen. For the next 20 minutes, she fielded questions, some thoughtful, some awkward, some clearly performative. She handled them all. She talked about PTSD treatments designed around male physiology, about the quiet epidemic of older female veterans in transitional shelters, about how it took 7 years for the VA to acknowledge her traumatic brain injury because the intake staff assumed she was a nurse, not a combat leader. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't tell them they should have known better. She simply told them the truth. When the session closed and the chair thanked her again, the applause came from the gallery, not the panel, but it was the kind of applause that mattered. Slow, earnest. A man rising from his seat despite the cane. A young woman vet blinking fast, swallowing emotion. Because in Nora Ellis, they hadn't just heard testimony, they had witnessed clarity. That night, Nora returned to her modest home on the south edge of Helena. The lawn was trimmed with military precision. The porch light flickered, still in need of repair. She placed her uniform jacket on the hanger like muscle memory and stared for a moment at the ribbons pinned across the chest. 3 decades reduced to rectangles of colored cloth. In the kitchen, the kettle began to whistle. She didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on a photograph pinned to the fridge. It was an old one, a Polaroid, taken in Fallujah, 2004. Nora stood in the center of a dozen soldiers, grimy, grinning, wearing sweat and dust like badges of their own. Two of them had names etched on the Montana Veterans Memorial now. One of them had saved her life during a mortar strike. One she had carried herself after a roadside blast shattered his pelvis. She never forgot the way he looked at her when she said, "You'll make it, Corporal. That's an order." He didn't, but she never stopped believing he heard her. Nora never spoke much about that deployment, not because she couldn't, but because it changed her in ways she hadn't found words for. Not until Kabul. Not until the morning she held a translator's hand as he bled out because the airlift was late by 6 minutes. Not until she escorted his sister through the checkpoints, promising her they'd protect her. Not until that promise was broken by red tape. And then, she carried that story too. Not in protest, not in bitterness, but like a folded flag, tightly held, rarely opened. Too sacred to unfold before anyone who wouldn't understand the weight of it. 3 years ago, she almost gave up. When her appeal for updated disability benefits was delayed for the 5th time. When she sat in the VA lobby as a nurse asked, "And who are you here to support today?" When her military records arrived with her name spelled wrong, she started writing letters that were never sent. To her former commanders, to the families of men who never came home, to herself. What are you fighting for now? She wrote the question at the top of one page and left the rest blank for months. But then came the letter from the governor's office. An inquiry, a nomination, an acknowledgement that she, Lieutenant Colonel Nora J. Ellis, had officially become the highest-ranking female veteran in Montana's history. It was supposed to be a private distinction, no photo ops, no press tour. But the weight of that title, of what it meant for every young woman who thought combat and command were unreachable, sat heavy on her shoulders. So she said yes when they asked her to testify, and she put on the uniform again, not for recognition, but for representation. 1 week after the hearing, she received a package, no return address, inside a folded American flag, and a note, handwritten, "My daughter watched you speak. She enlisted this morning. She told me, if she can do that after what she's been through, maybe I can too. Thank you for standing tall so she could see further." Nora held the note between her fingers like a fragile thing, then placed it beside the photograph on the fridge, right where it belonged. By the 2nd week of March, a quiet ripple had started across Montana's veteran services. No headlines, no front-page stories, just slow, meaningful change. The kind that doesn't announce itself, but rewrites policy in silence. It began with a memo from the Office of Veteran Affairs. The subject line read, "Reassessment of Front Desk Protocol and Implicit Bias Training." A week later, centers in Billings, Missoula, and Helena received new guidance. Staff were now instructed to greet all walk-ins by name, no assumptions, no dismissals. Photos of local veterans, men and women from every background, were added to the waiting room walls. One of those photos was Nora's, though she hadn't submitted it. A retired Marine had done it for her. At the Capitol, Nora's hearing transcript was quietly circulated. The governor's office requested her to co-author a statewide recommendation titled "Visibility and Valor: Closing the Gap Between Service and Respect." She signed it without fanfare, just her name, and beneath it, "For those who are told to wait outside." At the very VA building where it all started, the security guard who had once blocked her path now stood taller. His name was Darren. He had served 2 tours in Bosnia. One morning, he left a cup of coffee at the front desk with a post-it that said, "Lieutenant Colonel Ellis, I'm sorry. We should have known who you were, but more than that, we should have treated you like who you are." He signed it, one veteran to another. Nora never replied, but she kept the note, folded carefully, in the same envelope as the governor's letter. And then came the emails. From young women in ROTC programs. From mothers raising daughters who'd never seen a female in uniform. From retired veterans who had watched her testimony online and whispered, "That's me. That's what I went through." Each message began with different words, but all echoed the same truth. I thought I was the only one. Nora responded to as many as she could, sometimes with full letters, sometimes with just 2 words. Keep going. But the moment that truly caught her off guard came in the form of a phone call. It was from Major General Renee Wallace, the new National Director for Veteran Inclusion. Her voice was calm, clipped, an unmistakable tone of command. But what she said wasn't an order. It was an invitation. We're forming a national committee on veteran dignity and representation. We'd be honored if you'd chair it. Nora paused. She looked out the window at the same porch where she once sat in doubt. The same sky, the same wind. But this time, the world had tilted, just slightly, toward listening. She answered simply, "I'll serve." One more time. 6 months later. The hall was grand but quiet. The kind of quiet you only hear when something important is about to begin. Inside the state capitol's south chamber, 300 chairs had been arranged in a wide arc. Veterans from every county had been invited. Some wore their medals. Others came in plain jackets, quietly carrying service in their posture. And at the center table sat Lieutenant Colonel Nora Ellis. Not as a guest, not as a witness, but as chair of the State Committee on Veteran Dignity and Representation. The man who once told her to please wait outside now sat 2 rows back, listening carefully. He was no longer at the front desk. He had requested a transfer to work directly with intake support for female veterans. Nora had signed the approval herself. To her right sat the governor. To her left, Major General Wallace. But Nora didn't seek validation in the seating chart. She had long since learned that true power does not reside in position, but in presence. When she stood to speak, she didn't begin with credentials. She didn't list battles or ranks. She began with a hallway, a waiting chair, and a woman told to wait outside. The story I'm about to share is not rare. It's simply rarely told. I was dismissed not because I wasn't a veteran, but because I didn't look like the one they pictured. And for too long, we've built systems on pictures, not people. That ends today. She didn't raise her voice, but every word hit like a drumbeat. She spoke of the quiet ways veterans are erased, not with violence, but with oversight, not with hate, but with habit. If we are to honor those who served, she said, we must first learn how to see them. Not just in war, not just in dress blues, but in waiting rooms, in city offices, in job interviews, in moments where their identity is no longer visible on their sleeve, but still lives in their silence. By the end of her speech, there were no cheers, no standing ovation, just silence and tears, and eyes wide open. That afternoon, the committee passed its first resolution. All veteran centers across the state would conduct annual inclusivity audits. All staff would receive updated training, not just in paperwork, but in perception. Nora didn't stay for the press release. She stepped out quietly, walking down the marble steps of the Capitol without escort. Outside, a teenage girl in a hoodie waited by the sidewalk. She hesitated, then asked, "Are you the colonel?" Nora turned, smiled gently. "I used to be." The girl nodded. "My mom said to tell you, thanks. She didn't think anyone would ever say what you said." That night, Nora returned home. The porch light was still broken, the mailbox still crooked. But in the quiet of her kitchen, she opened a package that had arrived during the week. Inside was her original medal, still in its navy blue case. Alongside it was a handwritten note from General Wallace. "Some medals you earn twice, once in battle, once in silence." Nora placed the case back in the drawer. She didn't need it on display. She already knew who she was, and from that day forward, every time someone stepped through the doors of a veteran center and was welcomed without hesitation, without assumptions, without delay, they didn't know it, but they were walking through a door that she had opened.